Welcome to episode 11 of Tales of the Ultimate Sportsman. True life fishing and hunting stories sent in by ultimate sportsmen and women from around the world. We hope you guys like these true stories, and if you do, please press on the follow button and leave a comment if you want to. Thanks, and see you next episode. Take care out there, and the best of luck.
The Master Owler Award by Gordon Chrisman, Charleston, South Carolina. The river has always been in my blood. I grew up on a sandy-bottomed river in Nebraska named the Platte, and have always held the outdoors and fishing in the highest regard. There is just something special about being out there on the open water, watching the sunlight or the moonbeams dancing atop the waves, and hearing the cottonwood leaves rustling on a hot summer night. You simply cannot experience the sheer awe of nature and not believe that there is so much more to life than what we can see. If you do a great deal of night fishing for catfish, you can see many unusual things. Sometimes you experience things that you can hardly believe, even though you did see it. Thus was the case one hot Nebraska summer when I planned a week-long boating trip down the Platte River to camp and fish. I loaded up my flat-bottomed John boat with the barest of necessities and berthed the boat from a launch 25 miles upriver on a beautiful, sunny morning. I floated downriver, quietly and gracefully, soaking in all the wonders of the outdoors. Every so often, I would test the depth of the channel with my oar. Whenever I would find a productive-looking location, I would toss out my anchor and fish. I caught a few here, a few there, but only enough to make a light meal. The daytime temperatures grew increasingly hotter, with no sign of relief in sight. By the third day, my portable thermometer was reading 106 Fahrenheit in the shade. With no breeze at night, even sleeping was becoming a sweaty chore. To top it all off, the fish just didn't seem to want to bite. I was having better luck catching soft-shell turtles, cooters, than fish. One turtle even managed to entangle all four of my fishing lines into the greatest rat nest I had ever seen. I spent the hours from 3 a.m. until dawn just trying to save as much of my line on each reel as I could. Needless to say, the cooter didn't live through the ordeal. The next night, I thought my luck had turned more positive. I landed a nice 4 1/2 pound flathead. I stringered this fish the next morning and moved on to the next hole. Upon arriving at this next stop, I checked my fish, only to find that the brass ring on the nylon stringer had pulled apart and the fish had gone free. This special stop I made was to check out a creek, which the river had cut through an island. A couple of years before, I had boated into this creek out of curiosity and found that the creek meandered through the entire island for a little over a mile. A den of beavers had constructed a dam near the outlet. Their dam had created a lake which was full of catfish, and the depth was averaging 5 feet. This year was a very dry one, though, and the opening to the creek was sanded shut. I hiked down the dry channel with my pole and bait, thinking that the lake had to still be there. You probably guessed, it was totally dried up too. As I made my way back out through the steamy, sweltering heat, in between the jointed snake grasses and breeze-stifling willows, a buck whitetail caught my scent and wasn't very happy with my presence. He chased me through the loose, soft sand of the creek until I made it to the open river and jumped over the John boat and into the deepest water I could find. The buck just stood at the edge of the timber and snorted and pawed the ground. I gathered up my rod and bait and slid my boat off the sandbar and made a humble getaway. What lay downriver for me was not pleasant. The water level in the river had dropped so much due to the dry weather, and I was entering into the widest and shallowest part. I had to get out and portage the boat over many a sandbar. Even if I were to find and stick to a channel, it would soon branch out so much that there was nothing left to float the boat in. I had to scuttle all the ice in my beer cooler and in the cooler which I had filled to keep the fish fresh. Heck, I wasn't using that ice anyway. I finally reached the home stretch near dusk, about 3/4 of a mile from the cabin. With no fish to show for my efforts, I was determined to give it one more try. I threw out all my lines and waited. Disgusted as heck, I curled up on my sleeping bag and sacked out. About 2:30 a.m., I awakened to the sound of bells. Bells. I thought it was Christmas and Santa and his reindeer were landing on the sandbar. Every one of my poles had a fish on, and I didn't know which one to reel in first. Wouldn't you know it, the best fishing spot was right there close to my cabin. I had just spent an entire week traversing 50 miles through a winding river channel, which would have been only 20 to 25 miles if the river was flowing, getting sunburned and fighting the river and the turtles and the deer. And all I really had to do was walk out in front of cabin and cast. Well, pretty close to that anyhow. I ended up with nearly 50 pounds of cleaned flathead catfish that night. I was so impressed with this hole that I talked my brother into going out again the next night. We sat there and fished the same hole, with the same baits, for hours. Not even a nibble. I tried to convince him that they were not going to bite until the wee hours of the morning, but I don't think he ever believed me. I thought I would try an old trick on the flatheads by presenting a very large minnow on top. I took off all my weights except a small split shot and let the line go out and out, then put a bell on the pole. We finally sacked out and curled up inside our sleeping bags. Our fire went out eventually, and the night went on. Sure enough, near 3:30 a.m., the bell on my pole rang like a 4-alarm fire was at full blaze. My brother was yelling at me to get up, and I was yelling at him to get the net. I was so excited that I couldn't even unzip my sleeping bag. So I did a potato sack race to the pole with a ringing bell. I knew the fish had already set the hook or swallowed it by now. So I reared back and pumped the pole for leverage. There was nothing. I revealed to my brother that I had lost him, and just then, my drag began to whine. Half asleep as I still was, I couldn't figure this riddle out. The pole was bending over behind me. The fish had gone upriver. You might think. The river turned away from us. There was nothing but sandbar behind me for nearly 1/2 mile, and then it was river bank, bluffs and trees. I fought this great flying catfish for nearly 30 minutes until we heard a great splash in the shallow water near the sandbar. By then, my brother had managed to get the Coleman lantern lit and walked toward the splashdown area. And there it was, a great horned owl, nearly hip-tall to me, and clutching my minnow in her talons. We assumed that it had to be hooked after all that fighting. We then attempted to free the uncooperative bird of prey from the hook. We were pecked and clawed and beat with its great wings. The old bird just finally unclutched his great talons and let the minnow and hook drop. It was never even hooked. Totally soaked, tired, and confused, the owl just hopped across the sandbar and into the darkness, leaving us with an empty stringer and shaking our heads in disbelief. Just to top off the story, there was no moon on this night, only starlight. So you tell me, how great the eyesight of an owl really is.
Dog Takes the Bait by Jimi Hendrix, Yuba City, California. A couple of friends and I were striper fishing on the Sacramento River here in Northern California. I had a 20-foot fish and ski barge, so since there was plenty of room, we decided to take my yellow lab, Tanner, along. I had decided to rebait my hook with a big chunk of cut sardine. I cut a big chunk, put it on the 2/0 mustad hook, and laid the leader, hook, and bait on top of the ice chest while I rummaged around in the boat for something. When I went to pick up the hook and leader, it was nowhere to be found. I looked all over for it. It was at that point that I noticed Tanner looking at me with 20-pound test hanging out of her mouth. I thought, oh no, and looked down her throat but couldn't see anything. I didn't know what to do, but since it was late at night and all the veterinary offices were closed, I just reached in as far as I could and cut the leader. The next afternoon, I was talking to my wife on the telephone, She was in the hospital for a minor issue and told her what had happened. She said that she was going to call a veterinarian. While I waited for her to call back, I let Tanner out so she could run around a bit. She went out on the lawn to relieve herself, and suddenly there was the hook, just like it went in, without the leader. When my wife called back, I was ecstatic. I told her that the hook had come out, and she asked me what I had done with it. I jokingly told her that it was in perfect shape, so I just washed it and put it back in my tackle box. According to the vet that she spoke to, that was one lucky dog.
A Night of Shrimp Baiting by Shannon Wakeland, Charleston, South Carolina. I remember the first time I ever had the chance of experiencing the art of shrimp baiting. It had seemed easy enough when explained to me before the planned trip. Boy, was I in for a big surprise. Finally, I was getting the chance to go shrimping. I was so excited that the night before we were to go, I barely slept a wink. Earlier that week, I had learned that I needed a saltwater fishing license. So I headed out to the nearest tackle shop the day before and acquired one. The only person who needed a shrimp baiting license was the shrimper himself, so I didn't need to worry about that part. Now I was ready to go. I was looking forward to a night of fun. This seemed to be a popular thing to do here in Charleston, so I thought I would give it a shot. How hard could it be? Once we got there, though, my outlook on this popular seasonal sport changed dramatically. I dressed in old faded blue jeans, a worn-out college sweatshirt, some good water-resistant shoes, and waited patiently for my ride to the Tugadoo River. This is where I was told we were going. I was also told to pack a light snack, so there I sat with my bag in hand until I saw the old Ford pickup rounding the corner of my street. Excited, I jumped up off of the steps and walked toward the truck, looking skeptically at the 10 poles sticking out from inside of the small fishing boat. I rolled down my window once I entered the smoke-filled Ford and said a cheerful, "Hi," to my friend the shrimper. He mumbled a few words, not sure what he was taking on by having me tag along for the night. I began asking him questions, and that is when he decided to start talking. He answered my questions about the poles in the back of the boat. I was still a little confused, but he assured me by the end of the night I would understand completely. So I said, "Fine," and sat back and listened to an old Bob Seger song on the radio as we made our way to the Tugadoo River. My nostrils immediately realized we were close when I inhaled the familiar smell of the marsh, an aroma one can only experience for oneself before knowing what the full effect is. The old Ford took the bumps and the turns pretty well, and before long I could see the outline of the marsh and the river. I was amazed at all the trucks lined up, waiting for their turn to back up their boats into the darkened waters of the Tugadoo River. I glanced at my friend nervously, wondering how we would maneuver his boat amongst the others. But pretty soon we were backing it up and into the water. As we sped away from the landing, I glanced behind me, still amazed at the crowded boat landing, and also wondering at the same time how we would ever find our way back to the small place in the dark. I wouldn't worry about that for now, though. Not yet, anyhow. I watched my surroundings, marveling at the beauty of the countryside. The river was only about 20 feet wide, and on either side, the marsh lined the muddy banks, sometimes a house coming into view, but mostly just trees and wildlife. I could have sped along in the small fishing boat for hours just watching, but all too soon we began to slow down. We came upon a small spot on the bank with what seemed like hundreds of oak trees hanging over the water. The boat slowed down, barely moving. The driver left his seat at the wheel and walked to the front of the boat. Reaching out, he grabbed one of the tree branches, then pulled the boat up onto the bank. I looked at him curiously, but still he didn't speak. Finally, after rummaging around in the boat, he found an old bucket and then leaned over the side and began digging into the mud and bringing up handfuls of the smelly stuff. He then would put the mud into the bucket. I asked what he was doing. "Getting mud for the bait," I said. "Oh." Not sure what that meant, but after a while I soon found out. I crinkled my nose at the smell of the fish meal that he explained would attract the shrimp. Ignoring the churning of my stomach, I joined in and helped my friend make bait balls. which entailed mixing fish meal with the mud and then forming them into balls the size of a softball. I was glad that I had my fake fingernails taken off the week before. Soon, after about 50 were made and my hands were aching, we left our place on the bank and coasted along in the boat, leaving the closeness of the river and heading out towards the intracoastal waterway. Before long we reached some more marshland, and by then it was getting dark. My friend stopped the boat and began telling me what my duties included. I sat there listening, trying my best not to look nervous, but I'm sure he could tell. I took in everything he said, making sure that I would not forget a single instruction. I sat behind the wheel, maneuvering the small craft alongside the marsh as he expertly inserted the poles into the mud banks about 10 yards apart. Once this was completed, we coasted up to each one and began throwing the mud balls we had made earlier in front of the poles. By then I realized that these poles were actually PVC pipes that are mostly used in water lines, but shrimpers, like my friend here, use them as shrimp poles. The poles help him know where the bait was thrown. Made a lot of sense to me. Then he explained to me that we would wait for about an hour until the tide came in, hopefully bringing the shrimp with it. So we waited and talked some, but mostly just sat there as I took in my surroundings and listened to the sounds around me. By then it was dark, making it seem almost eerie to me at times, yet exciting. Crickets chirped loudly in the distance, cows expressed themselves through their occasional moo, and every now and then a porpoise swam by, checking us out. Or so, that is what my friend said. Finally, the time came. He threw his cigarette over the side of the boat and explained to me what I had to do. I listened once more, unsure of what the next few hours would hold for me. After taking one more swig from my Pepsi, I put the boat in forward and coasted slowly toward the first pole. As I was almost upon it, I put the boat in neutral, watching as the expert placed the casting net between his teeth while holding onto the end of it, then casting it outwards. It landed atop the water, directly in front of one of the poles before sinking slowly to the bottom of the river. Jolting me out of my trance, he yelled from the front of the boat, "Back up!" I had completely forgotten to. I put the boat in reverse, guiding it back slowly, as I watched my friend pull the casting net up and out of the water and into the boat. I could see bright pink eyes everywhere. He held the net up over a cooler and unfolded it, and when he did, it seemed as if hundreds of shrimp fell from everywhere. This process was repeated over and over again. I began to wonder if the man was going to shrimp all night. Finally, when the cooler was full, and all of the poles had been hit at least 20 times, we stopped. I was tired, exhausted actually, but also thrilled at the same time. I had never seen so much shrimp. After pulling up the poles, we headed back to the boat landing. I was in charge of holding the spotlight, he told me. So up front I sat, huddled in my sweatshirt, as the cold November wind stung my face, but I still kept my eyes glued to the dark, forbidding water in front of me. I wasn't sure how he knew where to go, because I couldn't even see 10 feet in front of me. But soon we arrived at our destination. Once we're safely back in his truck and heading back home, I finally let out a long sigh. He glanced over at me, smiling, then said 3 words that I had not expected, but longed to hear. "Good job, kiddo." I smiled tiredly, laying my head back against the seat, and thought about my first night of shrimp baiting. I knew it was a night that I would never forget.
That was episode 11 of Tales of the Ultimate Sportsman. I'm John Hedin, your host. You were just listening to true life fishing and hunting stories sent in by ultimate sportsmen and women just like you. We hope you guys like these true stories, and if you do, please click on the follow button and leave a comment if you want to. Thanks, and see you next episode. Take care out there, and best of luck.